What happens to your identity when you lose your job after 15 years? Do you press on or do you give yourself time to pause and reflect and reinvent yourself? Somi Kim tells an inspiring story about going through a layoff and how she's handled it. Stay tuned for another episode of the Daring to Transcend podcast. Today, we're welcoming Somi Kim to the Daring to Transcend podcast. Since the disbanding of J&J Design, Somi has entered a period of enriching personal growth in addition to dedicating precious time to her family's health and well-being. This transition continues to inform her professional evolution and has been a phase of valuable reflection, exploration, and service. Through guest facilitator roles, panel discussions, collaboration invitations, and editorial advisory work, she's been actively building the foundation for the next stage of her career. These dynamic experiments have broadened her understanding of the potential impact she can make in the future, and she's excited to determine the best ways to leverage her skills and experience to make a positive difference. So welcome, Somi, to the show. I'm really happy to have you here, and I know we've got a lot of interesting topics to dive into, but I know you were at J&J before they disbanded, as we said in there. So tell me a little bit just about your career journey and how you got maybe to where you were with J&J first, and then we'll dive into the next dynamic.
Sure. Thank you so much, Karen. It's a pleasure to be having this conversation. I was never somebody who thought of myself as going inside the large multinational corporation. I actually came from more of a visual communication and graphic design background and had my own business for a dozen or so years back in the early days of computer-aided design. And then I had a short stint at Ogilvy in Los Angeles in an agency role, leading what was at that time called the Brand Integration Group. And from there, I wanted to see how I might have more impact at scale. And I was approached by a headhunter when J&J Design was forming. And initially, it was called the Global Strategic Design Office under the leadership of Chris Hacker.
Okay.
And so it was just a bit of a non sequitur for me because I always imagined that I would stay more on the design side, on either the agency side or within perhaps a different kind of consultancy, and not to go inside a very large healthcare company with multiple sectors and a lot of acronyms.
Yeah, that's a big change, and especially to your point, the pharmaceutical world is a world unto itself in a lot of ways, very different. So what attracted you to going into that?
I have to say that I was so taken by the conversations that I had with my first manager, Chris, and also the HR partner, Ellie Griffith, who was so amazing in telling me about the credo that was the basis, the guiding North Star for the company. And that was really my first exposure to a company that had values really guiding its decisions. And the idea of joining a startup within the company, in a way, in the design organization that was forming, it was just seemed like a huge opportunity to practice design in a different context and to think more broadly about what we could do to instill human values into the experiences for all of the stakeholders. And so that attracted me. I didn't really know. And actually, initially, I was in the consumer business. So I started off based out of the Neutrogena offices in Los Angeles. And so it was more on the skincare and beauty side of things. But it was still a huge education in and of itself to understand the importance of supply chain and all of the back of house processes that one had to understand and comply with in order to be transparent and to bring things to market in the right way. So really, really fascinating. And I think the thing that has always been a big, important factor for me is the people. And so I found a really, really interesting group of multidisciplinary folks who had come together and were really trying to do the right thing. And it was a lot of fun. It was very different from a more bespoke, smaller scale design consultancy type experience.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And I love I love that one of the things that attracted you was the company having values and clearly, doing business in alignment with those values. It's a concept, it's a common thread that I find in a lot of my conversations with women leaders is, this deep desire to be wanting to live, in accordance with your own values and find organizations or create organizations that reflect those values. And so I love that that's part of this evolution for you in that. So you were with J&J for, I think you said 15 years?
That's right. It's a long time.
It is a long time. And you loved every minute of it? Yeah.
I did. I have to say that I learned so much. I had so many great opportunities to collaborate with many different types of people. I worked across the sectors. So I was able to work with the pharma folks, with med tech. At the time, there were also consumer devices earlier on.
Yeah.
And it was just an amazing opportunity to see how health infuses every aspect of life. So it isn't simply about selling product. It's about understanding how can we better change behavior in order to get to better health outcomes. And global public health was another area of passion for me because it's so crazy that we have so much technology at our fingertips, and yet there are many, many thorny problems that persist in different parts of the world. And so how might we look at helping to enable the people within those countries that perhaps don't have fully developed health systems? And even in our own backyard, we know that in the US, there are many, many challenges when it comes to healthcare delivery and access. And so I think looking at the systems perspective has always been of interest. And I had the opportunity while at Johnson & Johnson to actually connect two initiatives that were looking at that long game, that bigger picture.
Yeah, which to your point is so important because, at the end of the day, if we don't have our health, we really, it really diminishes a lot of things. Not eliminates them. And there's a lot of people with health challenges that do incredible things. So it doesn't necessarily stop us. But, good health is such a foundation for, our ability to contribute and make an impact, as you've said. So we talked a minute before we started this formal conversation about your transition out of J&J, which was not a voluntary one. The design group was disbanded, as we mentioned in your intro. And, I know from my own personal experience, even though I chose to voluntarily leave my corporate job, there's a big shift in identity as we make these kinds of transitions in our lives. So tell me what about that shift and that transition for you?
It was tough. I think that it was, first of all, a surprise, although retrospectively, we should have seen some of the signs because large organizational changes were happening. But for me, the loss of affiliation, the loss of that connectedness, because in a purpose-driven company, there is so much more than your day job. There's that sense of coming together around shared interests and attempts to actually do things that were beyond the scope of our work because we had the political will, and we could actually contribute more of our time. And so there was a mourning period because
Yeah. And that's really important because a lot of us don't take that mourning period, don't recognize it. And particularly in the American culture, it's like, okay, buck up, chin up, keep going, don't let anything get you down. But yet, as we make those kinds of transitions, mourning is very important.
that's right. And I have to say that I benefited greatly from the communities of which I'm still an active member. Some of those were friends, some were former colleagues. I also have really enjoyed being a part of the Quorum Initiative. You mentioned meeting Meg Sullivan. So she and I,
we interviewed, I interviewed Meg Sullivan not too long ago. So viewers may remember her interview at this point.
she's really an inspiration, and we met because we were in the same cohort as Aspen Institute First Movers Fellows back in 2017, I think. So having a supportive community of women at different stages of their careers and different backgrounds was so important to me as I emerged from that offboarding early
Because
year.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things we do, and I know this was very true for me, I was with my company for 30 years. The people that I worked with were more than just colleagues. They were friends. And not that I've lost touch with all of them, but sort of that withdrawal from that day-to-day community, the day-to-day purpose-driven activity was a bigger impact than I expected it to be. And I think we don't really quite always recognize while we're in it how valuable that work community is. So I love that you were able to replace or supplement that community with other things like the Quorum Initiative, which is just an amazing organization. I agree.
The other thing that was really important to me during the year after I left Johnson & Johnson was to give myself permission not to be driven by fear. And I looked around and I saw many amazing colleagues who were in a similar situation, but were just super driven to land that next job.
Yep.
And I was in awe of how they were able to mobilize and actually go out there and in some cases very quickly find new positions that will take them on amazing new trajectories. So bravo to them. But I also felt that I had worked so hard my whole life from when I was in high school. And as a child of immigrants, you never really stop. And so I gave myself permission to pause. And it was scary because all of those little voices tell you, oh my gosh, my son still has to get through college. I still have bills to pay.
Yeah.
And on and on. But that was so important to be able to say, I'm not going to immediately focus on the next big job because maybe it's not one job. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's multiple things. Maybe I want to pivot. And while I did apply to roles that I saw posted and I benefited from some of the outplacement services, I had to do a resume that a machine could read, all of those things that, the last time I had searched for a job actively was when I was 22, right? Because everything else came to me or right. So you could imagine it's a different world.
It's a very different world, 100%.
And it was, I admit, a bit demoralizing to send in applications and have a resounding silence or a very quick robo email back saying thank you, but no thank you. And I learned to take that with a big grain of salt because I remembered when I was on the hiring end, there were often situations where we might have had an incumbent or somebody who was earmarked, but that we would have to post, and that you don't always know the full story behind any job posting.
Yeah, which is very true. But I just want to stop you for 1 minute, because I think there's something really important in what you're saying here, and that is that you didn't allow yourself to give in to the scarcity mentality, right? Which is so predominant in our culture, all of our cultures. I mean, it's just so predominant that, oh my gosh, if I don't have a job, I'm not going to pay my bills. I'm not going to have this. I'm going to run out of money. There's not enough jobs out there. All of those things that we get into that say, oh my gosh, there's not going to be enough. And we focus and we work so hard from that scarcity mentality, when in reality, as you're clearly discovering, there is so much more abundance available to us than we even open up to. And if we let go of that scarcity mentality, we never know what opportunities are going to be presented to us or that we're going to find. And maybe they're not even exactly what we expect them to be, which seems to be the case with you. It's not maybe exactly what you expected, but you've really are undergoing an amazing journey. So what opportunities are you finding in what you're doing?
Well, one thing that I was interested in exploring is public sector work, because it's the one area that I have not really gone all in. I've been private sector, I've been on the agency side, and I was interested in seeing how there's so many unmet needs in that public space, whether it's in government agency work or looking at the systems that could be stronger surrounding all of us here in the U.S. So I began to network and to explore what might that look like. I have my account with us.gov. They have a job portal that's fairly robust. And it was a humbling experience because there are so many criteria when applying for a government job. And I had to really learn again, what does that mean? If you need a federal resume, it's different from the regular one. And you need to actually put that you worked 40 hours a week, and you have to put the months and the day that you started and stopped. And there were so many things like that were about crossing T's and dotting the I's. Okay. And then I also found that when writing about my experience, I was using language that perhaps could have been seen as more marketing narrative, and less about just factual information told in a narrative that didn't have bullets. So I actually got feedback that having bullets within my descriptions of certain key executive criteria that didn't meet the need for a quote unquote narrative, which I took to mean, well, sentences that begin, have a middle, and have an end, and not bulleted lists.
Bulleted lists is how we communicate everything.
So things like that, just procedural challenges. And so I applied to quite a number of government jobs because they do have a mandate to infuse human-centered design practices and methods into how they are achieving goals throughout all the different agencies. Yeah. And so that has been an interesting learning curve. And I have a friend who's been giving me feedback who works within the Office of Personnel Management. Okay. And so that's been much appreciated, just that people believe that I have the right capabilities. It's just about how I can frame things in a way that will be better understood, and then finding the right opportunity.
Yeah, and you are really fortunate to have a friend that is helping you. But I think, again, that goes back to when you start to open up to new opportunities and new experiences, one of the things we have to do is ask for help, right? We have to ask for help. And sometimes we hesitate to do that, especially when we're in a little bit more of a vulnerable situation like you are.
That's right. And I found that people are incredibly generous.
Yes.
So that has been really amazing and wonderful to find that people from my past and recent past are willing to connect and to just be a sounding board.
Yeah.
And so that's been super important to just be able to get feedback. I'm not asking them for direct referrals to jobs, but I just want to hear whether what I'm thinking about resonates and what they might think I should, in terms of additional research, looking at companies and talking to people who are maybe like-minded, although in a different field. So that's been really, really helpful and heartwarming to find that people have that generosity of spirit. And I, in turn, have always wanted to be there for others as well, and have been continuing to connect with some of my former colleagues and friends who were similarly going on their next journeys and finding various obstacles along the way. And I'm happy to impart what I've learned, because it can be scary. There have been definitely low moments when I've felt like, I just want to lie here and binge watch something on the streaming services that I am continuing in my fear-driven scarcity mentality of canceling everything.
And so what's the percentage of time that you actually say, okay, no, I'm not going to go binge watch this. I'm going to keep plowing on. And the percentage of time you actually give yourself permission to take a break?
It fluctuates. I will say that there have been low moments when I just felt like I cannot do anything and I'm not going to, and I'm going to take a bit of pause. Or if I have a demand on my time from a family member, I might say, I can be all in for my elderly mother during this week because I don't have 500 conference calls competing with my time.
Yeah.
That has been a gift, to be able to have focus on things that are so important, but that we generally put on the back burner when we are fully employed.
Yeah, no, I know that. And I've shared this before, but that's honestly leaving corporate. That was one of my biggest gifts, because my parents, shortly after I left, really needed me, and I could very much take the time to be present and to do the things that I don't even say I needed to do. I mean, some of those things could have been handled had I still been working or whatever, but it was such a gift to spend that time with them and to be able to ease their transition out of this life, as in those last few years, because I did, to your point, I didn't have the demands of a full-time job. So there are gifts in many situations that I personally wouldn't have expected that to be a gift, but it turns out it was probably one of the biggest gifts of my life.
Yes, I completely understand that sense of time being precious.
Yeah.
And in a different way. And I think similarly, I've been doing a lot of things that I couldn't do when I was working. So I've been cooking more, and I've been trying to help my son, who's in the throes of the end of high school. And I go on long walks with the dogs and just try to be present in the moment.
Yeah.
This year, I've been focusing on becoming healthier. So I've been taking up more regular exercise and really, really pushing down on getting back into shape. So that's been something that's been a shift in my behavior, because I never really had to. I got my cardio running for the train, running. And as soon as I wasn't commuting in, the pandemic was the first stage of that.
Yeah.
But I realized that I needed to book time for things that otherwise would never be given the right amount of space within my calendar.
Yeah, no. So with what you've learned in this, and I know, that your journey is still unfolding and you're still exploring opportunities and possibilities. But in this, what you're learning now, how is that going to change how you approach your next position?
I will need to understand the culture and the expectation of the next place that I become affiliated with, whether it is contract role or part-time or full-time.
Yeah.
And to me, that's going to be so important because I've spent such a large chunk of my life managing up, managing sideways, being the fixer, being, all
yes,
sorts of
yes,
things.
yes, yes. All kinds of things. Yeah, all kinds of things that women leaders often do.
Yes. And frankly, I'd rather contribute more specific value add outputs and inputs to whatever it is that a team is trying to accomplish. So I think that I'm going to be looking very closely at what is the reality, what is that day to day. And that's hard to gauge.
It is.
Especially if you are exploring something with a company that you don't really have a connection to.
Right.
So, and that's another reason to take time and to network and to talk to a lot of people, is to just understand, get a read on, well, what is it really like? It's not just about what they say on Glassdoor. It's more. And I really do believe that there are situations that are perhaps under the radar. I would never consider it because I don't know what I don't know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I love the way you're taking a holistic approach to this. And I mean, that's really, in everything that you said, that's really what's coming across to me is as you go forward into this next phase of your career, whatever that is going to look like, you're taking a more holistic look at it rather than just this job, this title, this money, right? It's more because our lives are so much more than that. And I know that so many women in the later stages of their careers, are leaving corporate or are making different choices because I think we do tend to get to a certain point in our lives where we sit back and say, okay, what's the big picture here? What's the big picture of my life? My family, my community, my job, my financial resources, my family, I said family already, but, my health, right? All of those things become much, we see things from a much broader scope rather than just focused on the goal of, okay, what's my next job? What's my next promotion? How do I move forward? And it doesn't mean that we're taking things away from what we're contributing at our jobs, right? I think, some people hear that and say, oh my gosh, well, she's not going to work hard because she's doing that. Well, and that's not true at all. In fact, in a lot of ways, you might work harder and contribute better because you're looking at things holistically and you're coming to your next job with a deeper understanding of yourself and others, and with a deeper level of commitment to high performance in all areas of your life.
I really do believe that there's a lot more that I'm going to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
I refuse to hear the naysayers who talk about, well, there's ageism. Yes, perhaps, but it's a yes and, right? Not
It's
a but.
yes and. It's yes and. Always yes and.
Yeah. So that's something that I'm really, maybe I've convinced myself of this, and I've had some really great meetings with people who seem to believe that there is more to be done. And some of them are old friends, and we'll see what happens. It's exciting, and I actually am grateful that I don't have to worry so much economically, and I recognize that there are some who are in very different situations. And so that's something that I'm grateful for. and I don't take it for granted. So yes, I have had to tighten my belt, but I had to put aside enough when I was working that I can actually take a sabbatical in a sense.
No, and it's interesting that you say that, because I mean one of the reasons that I call my company Daring to Transcend, and I love the word transcend in that, it means rising above, rising, and which is truly what you are in the process of doing, rising above all the experiences that you've had and creating a new reality for yourself. But, the word transcendence is actually, what I use it for is actually based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So most of us learned those 5 hierarchy of needs, starting with, your basic survival, food, shelter, those kinds of things, and moving up that. And I think self-actualization was what was at the top of his initial triangle. But a lot of people don't know that later in his career, he added a 6th triangle at the top that was called self-transcendence, where we go beyond ourselves, both in what we believe about ourselves, the stories we tell about ourselves, and we become more connected to the broader community, to the broader global humanity, and are able to contribute and want to contribute at a higher level. And that's why I love the word transcendent. That's why I called my company Daring to Transcend, because it's a risk to do that. It's a risk to do what you're doing right now in some ways. I mean, not a reckless thing, but it's a risk worth taking. It's a risk to really explore what is possible for me. And you can put, okay, yeah, I'm too old. I'm a woman. I'm a woman of color. Whatever whatever label you want to put on yourself, you can put it on yourself and say, this is going to hold me back. But at the end of the day, really what's holding you back then is you.
I agree with that. And I had to get over a lot of things. Speaking of the stories that we tell ourselves, I had to be vulnerable and get help from friends who offered to read some of my, whether it was cover letters or resumes. And that was very humbling, because I realized that most of my working life, I was never able to explain effectively what I did to my parents. And so when I think back, it's the typical situation of maybe making things a bit more complicated than they need to be, being inside that bubble where most of the people you talk to get it.
Yeah.
And so when you're no longer in the bubble, you really have to take a hard look and say, does this really mean what I'm trying to say? Or is it confusing? And especially, I think of myself as somebody who's done so many different things that it probably does confuse people. What does she say that she can really do well? Because it seems to be all over the place. So that discipline to rethink what it is to focus on and not worry about validating oneself by telling everything from the beginning. Yeah. That was liberating as well. And I had a friend who, she's an editor and a journalist, and she gave me such great feedback on a recent letter. And I really took that to heart. And so I feel like every time I try to retell my story, it's going to get better as I focus in on what are the things that matter most to me to communicate to others.
Yeah, what are the important parts of your story you want to bring forward, and what are the parts of your story that either aren't as important or that you even choose to leave behind? Because we get to do that too. We get to choose what we're bringing forward as well as what we're leaving behind.
That's true.
And to your point, you don't necessarily have to bring everything forward. You bring what you're really good at and what you really care about forward. And I love that. So as we kind of wrap things up today, this is just This has just been such an amazing conversation, Somi. I'm so happy that you joined us. But if people want to get in touch with you to explore opportunities with you or to learn more about your journey or, just connect and support or get support, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, LinkedIn is an easy way to do it. Probably that's the best way. I think if they message me, I can respond and give them my email and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's perfect. And we will have your LinkedIn credentials in the show notes for the show. So if people can grab that and jump onto LinkedIn and find you. And, I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability today, because it's this conversation today about identity and storytelling and what we're bringing forward is so important to women as they continue to evolve. And, you're a shining example. So I really appreciate it. And if you viewers would like to get in touch with me and learn more about my stories, either my books or the podcast or the other ways that I help women tell their stories, please reach out to me at daringtotranscend.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.